So, tell me, what exactly does a data analyst do all day? Just stare at numbers? The laughter around the Thanksgiving table was warm and easy, like everyone had been waiting for permission to say it out loud. My brother Marcus set his glass down and grinned. She's being generous. It's more like staring at spreadsheets and pretending it matters. More laughter. My mother, Patricia, reached over and patted my hand the way you comfort a child who just dropped her ice cream cone. We're just glad you have something stable, sweetheart. Stability is underrated. My father nodded like she'd said something profound. Courtney, Marcus's girlfriend of 4 months, smiled at me from across the table. It wasn't a mean smile. That was the thing about Courtney. Her smiles never looked mean. They looked patient, the way a surgeon looks patient when a medical student gets something obviously wrong. She tilted her head and said, I think what Maya does is actually really important. In a supporting role kind of way. Then she went back to her turkey. I picked up my fork. I didn't say anything. I never say anything. Have you ever been so completely erased by the people who are supposed to know you best that you start to wonder if maybe they're right? That maybe you really are just background? I'd like to hear your story in the comments because I spent a long time believing mine. What my family saw when they looked at me was a 29-year-old woman who worked from a home office, rarely attended their social events, didn't own a car that impressed anyone, and had never once brought home a person worth introducing. What they saw was Maya Chen, the quiet one, the safe one, the girl who peeped at state science fair and then sort of just plateaued. My brother Marcus was their North Star, 32, regional sales director at a biotech firm. Good jaw, good handshake, the kind of loud, confident laugh that makes rooms feel bigger. He was the one they talked about at church. He was the one whose girlfriend, now this Courtney, a VP at a health tech investment firm, made my mother's eyes go a little bright with something close to reverence. And then there was me. What they didn't know was that for the past 3 years, I'd been quietly building something in that home office while they assumed I was formatting spreadsheets. I'm a computational biologist. I specialize in predictive diagnostic modeling. And 18 months ago, I had finished building a clinical algorithm called ClearPath, a piece of software that uses anonymized patient data to predict sepsis onset up to 6 hours earlier than any existing clinical tool. 6 hours. In medicine, that's the difference between a full recovery and a funeral. I had built it alone, funded it with my own savings, filed the preliminary patent myself, and I had been in quiet negotiations with a hospital network licensing consortium for the past 4 months. The deal on the table was worth $4.2 million in licensing rates, with a royalty structure that would run for 11 years. Nobody at the Thanksgiving table knew any of this, and sitting there watching Courtney refill her wine glass while my mother thanked her for her stability comment, I had no intention of changing that. I drove home that night thinking about something my graduate advisor once told me. She said, the most dangerous thing a woman in this field can do is announce herself before her work is finished. Let the data speak. So I had been letting the data speak. Quietly, in a server room 2,000 miles away, while my family passed the cranberry sauce and talked about Marcus's upcoming promotion. I thought that was enough. I was wrong. 6 days after Thanksgiving, my phone rang at 7:14 in the morning. It was Dr. Port, Yolanda Ferris, the licensing liaison at the consortium I'd been negotiating with. Her voice was careful in a way that made the back of my neck go cold. Maya, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to be honest with me. Are you currently in discussions with any other parties regarding ClearPath? I sat up in bed. No, absolutely not. Why? Because we received an inquiry yesterday from a health tech investment group. They were asking very specific questions about the algorithm's architecture, questions that would only make sense if someone had already seen the technical documentation. I felt something cold settle behind my sternum. What firm? She told me the name. I recognized it immediately. It was Courtney's firm. I told Dr. Ferris I would call her back. I hung up. I sat in the quiet of my apartment, and I made myself think very carefully, the way I always do when a dataset doesn't add up. How would Courtney's firm know about ClearPath? I had never mentioned it to anyone in my family. The consortium negotiations were under NDA. My GitHub repository for the project was private. My patent filing was preliminary and not yet public record. Then I remembered something small, something I had dismissed at the time. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, Marcus had called me, which was unusual. He said Courtney was putting together a pipeline review for Q1, and was there anything I was working on that might be worth a look from an investment angle? I had said no, nothing interesting. He had laughed and said, yeah, figured. That had been the end of it, a 30-second phone call I had forgotten about entirely. I pulled up my laptop. I opened the Access log for my private research drive. I am very careful about security. This is not a coincidence or a personality quirk. It is a professional necessity. When you spend 3 years building something in private, you learn to treat your data the way a jeweler treats the only copy of an irreplaceable stone. My drive is encrypted. It requires two-factor authentication. But I had made one mistake, 8 weeks earlier. Marcus had texted me asking if he could store some of his own documents in a shared cloud folder while he was between laptops. I had created a subfolder for him. Nothing sensitive, but when I created the folder, I had been tired, and I had granted his access token slightly broader permissions than I intended. I checked the logs. His account had accessed the shared folder 11 times in 6 weeks. Normal. But on one occasion, 4 weeks ago, the session had lasted 47 minutes. For a folder containing nothing but Marcus's own tax documents and a PDF of a lease agreement, 47 minutes was a very long time. I cross-referenced the session timestamp with the IP address. It wasn't Marcus's home network. It wasn't his office. It was a coffee shop 3 blocks from Courtney's firm's downtown office. I closed the laptop. I stood up and walked to my kitchen and made coffee and stood at the window looking at the street below. I wasn't angry yet. I was in the place I always go first. The place that looks like calm but is actually just the quiet hum of my brain working. I was doing the audit. Here's what I knew. Courtney was a VP at a health tech investment firm. She had been dating my brother for 4 months. She had access to Marcus's phone and email through sheer proximity. Marcus had called me 3 weeks before Thanksgiving asking about my work. A call that was completely out of character for him and that I now believed was not his idea. Someone had spent 47 minutes in a cloud folder that should have taken 4 minutes to navigate. And now her firm was asking very specific questions about a piece of software that did not exist in any public record. I did not confront Marcus. I did not call Courtney. I did not call my parents. I am a scientist. I don't act on hypotheses. I act on evidence. So I set a trap. It was elegant and quiet, the way I prefer things. I created a document. On its surface, it looked exactly like ClearPath's core technical summary. The kind of thing that would be enormously valuable to an investment firm trying to evaluate or replicate the algorithm. But the architecture described in the document was subtly, carefully wrong in ways that would only become apparent after significant development time and wasted engineering resources. More importantly, I embedded a silent tracking element in the document's metadata. Nothing illegal, nothing aggressive, simply a signal that would phone home the moment the file was opened on any device outside my own network, logging the IP address, the device type, the timestamp, and the geographic location. I named the file ClearPath Tycho Overview Vinyl Tycho Rose Review D7 PDF, and I placed it in the shared cloud folder, one level up from Marcus's subfolder, in a location that would be visible to his access token if someone were looking. Then I waited. I did not have to wait long. 41 hours later, at 11:23 on a Tuesday morning, my tracking element sent me a notification. The file had been opened. The IP address resolved to the downtown office building of Courtney's firm. The device was a corporate registered MacBook. The session lasted 22 minutes. I saved the log. I forwarded it to my own encrypted archive. I sat with it for a long moment, and then my phone buzzed with a text from my mother, a reminder about the family holiday dinner she hosted every December, the one she called the Winter Gathering because she thought it sounded more elegant than Christmas party. She was particularly excited this year because she'd invited some of Marcus and Courtney's friends as well. It would be a big group. 30 people, maybe more. The good china. The catered appetizers. The kind of event my mother treated as a theatrical production, and my father treated as a hostage situation he had agreed to years ago and could no longer negotiate his way out of. I read her text. I thought about the tracking log sitting in my encrypted archive. I thought about Dr. Ferris's voice on the phone, careful and cold. I thought about 47 minutes in a cloud folder that should have taken 4. I thought about Courtney's smile at Thanksgiving, the patient, surgical one. I wrote back to my mother, "I'll be there. Should I bring anything?" She replied, "Just yourself, sweetheart. And maybe dress up a little." Courtney always looks so put together. I set my phone down. I went back to work. The winter gathering was on a Saturday. I arrived at my parents' house in a dark green wrap dress that I had bought 3 years ago for a conference presentation and worn exactly twice since. The house smelled like pine and my mother's standing rib roast, the one she made every December since I was 7. The living room had been pushed back to accommodate a long-rented table, and I could hear the string of a playlist she called Festive Ambience coming from the kitchen Bluetooth speaker. Marcus was near the door when I came in. He looked genuinely happy to see me, which made something in my chest ache in a way I hadn't expected. My brother is not a bad person. That is the hardest part. He is loud and careless, and he loves me in the way people love things they've never had to think very hard about. But I don't believe he is cruel. I believe he is easy to influence. I believe he tells himself that a 30-second phone call asking about my work was just making conversation. Courtney was across the room, holding court with two couples I didn't recognize. She was wearing a cream blazer over a silk blouse, and she looked, as my mother had predicted, extremely put together. She saw me come in, and her smile appeared immediately. The patient one. She gave me a small wave. I smiled back. My father found me in the kitchen and asked how my work was going. I said it was going well. He nodded, the way he always does when he's satisfied with an answer that requires no follow-up. My mother handed me a glass of sparkling cider and told me I looked pretty. The dinner itself was the kind that runs long because everyone is comfortable and the food is good and no one wants to be the first to push back from the table. I sat near the middle, between one of my mother's friends from her garden club and a quiet man named David, who turned out to be a pediatric oncologist, and we talked for a long time about diagnostic accuracy and the problem of false negatives in early-stage testing. It was the best conversation I had had in months. Marcus gave a little speech partway through the meal, the way he always does at family gatherings, half toast, half performance. He thanked my mother for hosting. He made everyone laugh twice. And then he looked on the table at Courtney with the expression of a man who has made a decision he is proud of, and he said, I also just want to say that this woman right here has made this the best year of my life, and I hope she'll consider making next year even better. He pulled a small box from his jacket pocket. The table erupted. My mother pressed both hands over her mouth. Courtney looked genuinely surprised, or she performed genuine surprise convincingly, which in the moment is the same thing. She said yes. My mother made a sound I can only describe as operatic. The two couples I didn't recognize applauded. My father shook Marcus's hand. It was warm and real, and I clapped along with everyone else, and I meant it, I swear I meant it, because whatever Courtney had done had nothing to do with my brother's love for her, and his happiness in that moment was real. But later, after the dessert plates were cleared and people had drifted into the living room with their coffee and the noise level had dropped to a comfortable murmur, Courtney found me near the bookshelf. She had the ring on now. She looked radiant in the specific way that people look radiant when they've gotten what they wanted. She touched my arm and she said, I hope you're happy for him. For both of us. I said I was. She said, I know things have been a little awkward since Thanksgiving. I want you to know I have a lot of respect for what you do. Data work is genuinely valuable. In a support capacity, I looked at her. I said, I appreciate that. She smiled. She said, Marcus has told me so much about you. I feel like I already know you. She paused just long enough, and then she said, I actually looked into your work a bit. The medical data space is fascinating. Small world, right? I held her gaze for a moment. I said, It really is. She went back to Marcus. I watched her go. Then I walked to where I'd left my coat and my bag, and I took out my laptop and I found my father's study at the end of the hall, and I knocked on the open door and asked if I could use his HDMI cable for a few minutes. He said of course, and didn't ask why, because he never asks why, which was one of the things I had counted on. I set up in the living room while everyone was still scattered and talking. My mother's television was large and wall-mounted, the one my father used for football, and it was already connected to the soundbar she had installed for her movie nights. I tested the connection. It worked cleanly. Then I went and refilled my cider glass, and I said, in a voice loud enough to carry across the room without being a shout, Could I have everyone's attention for just a minute? The room quieted. My mother looked pleased, expecting a toast. Marcus put his arm around Courtney. My father sat forward in his armchair. I said, First, congratulations to Marcus and Courtney. I mean that. I said it looking at Marcus, and I saw something relax in his face. Then I said, Courtney, you mentioned a minute ago that you looked into my work. I smiled. I've been wanting to talk about that, actually. I pressed play. The screen behind me came to life. It was a screen recording, a clean time-stamped screen recording of my tracking log, showing the file name, the date, the time, the IP address, and the location of Courtney's firm's downtown office. Then it cut to a second window, the access logs from Marcus's shared folder, showing the 47-minute session from the coffee shop 3 blocks from her building. Then it cut to a third document, which was the preliminary patent filing for ClearPath with my name on it, and the date, which was 14 months before Courtney's firm had begun making inquiries about the algorithm's architecture. The room was very quiet. Courtney's expression had done something I can only describe as structural, not emotional. Structural. Like watching a building lose a load-bearing wall. The patient's smile was gone. What replaced it was not rage and not fear, but something more precise. The look of a person rapidly recalculating. I kept my voice completely level. I said, ClearPath is a clinical predictive algorithm I built over 3 years. It detects sepsis onset up to 6 hours before existing tools. I have a preliminary patent, and I am currently in license negotiations with a hospital consortium. 4 weeks ago, a document I had placed as a test in a shared cloud folder was accessed from your firm's office building. I know this because I built a tracking element into the file. I also know that the session from the coffee shop near your office, using my brother's access token, lasted 47 minutes. I looked at Marcus. His face had gone very still. I said, I want to be clear. I'm not making an accusation in front of everyone tonight for drama. I'm making it here because Dr. Yolanda Ferris at the licensing consortium called me 6 days ago, and I told her I would handle it quietly. I have also forwarded this documentation to an IP attorney, which means the quiet window is closing. My mother made a small sound. My father had not moved. Courtney said very carefully, those are serious allegations. I said, they are. The tracking log is timestamped and the IP is registered to your building. If your firm would like to argue that point, Dr. Ferris's legal team is ready to receive that argument. I paused. Or we can save everyone a significant amount of time and unpleasantness. There was a silence in that living room that felt geological in its weight. Courtney looked at Marcus. Marcus was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Something that took me a moment to identify. It was the expression of someone who had just realized they were holding a door open that they did not know was a door. He said, Court, did you? She said, Marcus not here. He said, did you go through her files? She said his name again, very quietly like a warning. He looked at me. He said, Maya. I swear I didn't know. The call I made to you, she asked me to. She said she was doing market research, and I thought, he stopped. He looked like he was going to be sick. I thought it was just, I didn't know she was going to. I said, I know, and I did know. That was the hardest part of the whole thing, the part I had spent 10 days preparing myself for. I knew my brother was not the architect of this. I knew he had been handed a small, innocuous-seeming task, and had not fought hard enough about what it was part of. That is a failure, but it is a different kind of failure than the one that had been committed against me. I looked at my mother. She was gripping her coffee cup with both hands. I said, I'm sorry this happened here. I want you to know that I'm not tearing this family apart. I'm just making sure we're all looking at the same set of numbers. 2 weeks later, Courtney's firm sent a formal letter through their legal counsel, acknowledging that a document bearing my tracking metadata had been accessed from their network and stating that this access had occurred without authorization and did not represent the firm's sanctioned activities. The letter was carefully, beautifully worded to protect the firm while implicitly confirming everything I had documented. My IP attorney called it one of the more elegant non-apology apologies she had ever received, and she had received many. Courtney and Marcus did not call off the engagement. That surprised people, I think. But I understood it. Their relationship existed in a layer separate from what she had done to me. People are not single documents. They contain multiple versions of themselves running simultaneously, and the version that loved my brother was not the same one that had sent someone to a coffee shop with his login credentials. Whether that made it better or worse, I honestly couldn't tell you. I stopped trying to sort it out. What changed was something quieter and more permanent. The Sunday after the winter gathering, my father called me. Not my mother calling and handing the phone to my father. My father calling, his number on the screen, his voice when I picked up, a little rough at the edges the way his voice got when he was working up to something. He said, I want to ask you about this thing you built, this ClearPath. I said, okay. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, 6 hours. You said it gives 6 hours. I said, that's what the clinical trials show. In sepsis cases, the mean early detection window is 5.8 hours compared to current standard protocols. Another silence. He said, your mother's brother. In 2019. They didn't catch it in time. I said, I know, Dad. He said, I didn't know you were building this. I said, I know. He said, I'm sorry we made you feel like you had to hide it. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said, I'm going to come home for dinner next weekend. Just us. I'll explain the whole thing. He said, I'd really like that. We hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time. In the quiet of my apartment, in the ordinary afternoon light coming through the window I never remember to clean. Something in me felt different. Not healed exactly, not resolved. Because families don't resolve the way proofs resolve, cleanly and finally. But something had shifted in the foundation. A crack that had been there a long time had been located. That was enough to start with. The licensing deal closed on a Thursday in January. $4.2 million, 11-year royalty structure, with a joint development clause that would allow the consortium to expand ClearPath's diagnostic parameters to 3 additional early warning conditions over the next 5 years. Dr. Dix Farah sent me a bottle of sparkling wine and a card that said simply, "The data spoke." I put the card on my desk. Marcus texted me that evening. He had clearly heard from our parents. His text said, "Maya, I don't even know where to start. I'm proud of you doesn't cover it. I'm sorry doesn't cover it. Can I take you to dinner?" I wrote back, "Yes, you're paying." He sent back 3 laughing emojis and then a heart. Then he wrote, "For what it's worth, I think what you built is incredible. I always knew you were the smarter one. I just didn't say it enough." I stared at that message for a while. I thought about all the Thanksgiving dinners and winter gatherings and Sunday phone calls where that sentence had not existed. I thought about how a family can contain a true thing for 30 years and simply never surface it, the way sediment contains minerals no one has gone looking for yet. I wrote back, "You can say it now. That's the thing about the truth. It keeps." I closed my laptop that night the way you close a chapter, deliberately, with both hands. Outside my window, the city was doing its usual thing, indifferent and bright and in motion. Somewhere in a hospital, a clinician was reviewing an early alert that had come in 6 hours ahead of schedule, and making a decision, and buying a patient time they hadn't known they had. I went to bed. I slept the whole way through. People ask me sometimes, people who know pieces of the story, not the whole thing, why I stayed quiet for so long. Why I didn't tell my parents, didn't defend myself, didn't announce what I was building before anyone had a chance to dismiss it. And I always tell them the same thing, because in science, as in most things worth doing, the work has to come first. You don't announce the discovery before you've done the experiment. You run the trial. You collect the data. You let the numbers do what numbers do, which is tell the truth whether or not anyone is ready to hear it. Silence isn't hiding. Sometimes silence is just the lab running.